Thank you for joining us today for our panel, which is a part of PNB's Listening series. PNB's Listening is a collaboration between PNB artists and staff, providing opportunities to hear from Black and LGBTQ voices in our community. I'm Theresa Ruth Howard, your moderator today, and I'll be speaking with Sara Jones, Amanda Morgan, and Kiyon Ross. Full information for all of us speaking today can be found on pnb.org/listening, along with links to our work. So Sara Jones serves as the vice president on the board of trustees of Pacific Northwest Ballet and is an alumna of the PNB School and a former professional dancer. Amanda Morgan is from Tacoma. She studied at PNB School and joined PNB Corps in 2017. And in 2019, she founded the Seattle Project, a group of collaborative artists creating new work and dance that breaks down accessibility barriers in the community. Finally, Kiyon Ross is a former student, company, and faculty member at PNB and now serves on the management team of PNB as the director of company operations, the Seattle Racial Equity Learning Cohort, and the Equity Project. So thank you all for being here with me. This conversation is obviously timely because we are in a very specific moment in our country. Both COVID and the racial injustice issues that have our country basically up in arms. It is an uprising, and I think that the ballet community specifically has sort of risen up. The dancers themselves have risen up because the ballet world has been talking about working to diversify, working to include, working to create equity in our field. So that's kind of what brings us here today. And I want us to start, I think, at our point of entry, right? So Sara, will you start us to give us a little bit of background about how you came to ballet and where your head is in this very moment as to where ballet stands?
Absolutely. So, I came to ballet in, I'm going to age myself here, in the 1980s and the 1990s. I was fortunate to be able to dance on scholarship at Pacific Northwest Ballet School in the mid to late 90s through high school, and then went on to train with American Ballet Theater and freelance in New York before I made the individual decision in my early 20s that I wanted to pursue my academic career and go into business and public affairs. So, my time dancing was briefer than our other panel members, but it really ingrained in me a love of the art form, including making it through many, many challenges. And when I was a dancer in the school, just from a diversity perspective, I was the only Black dancer in the upper divisions of the school. And I remember it was me and one other Latino girl in our class, and in a few Asian students. And frankly, it wasn't very diverse. And I look today and I see that there's a lot more diversity within the school, which gives me hope for the future of ballet. Now this, the training environment is just the kind of tip of the iceberg and the beginning of the pipeline to driving more diversity in the art form. And, and I think about where we're at today and where, where I'd love to just see more representation, not only in the schools themselves, generally when we think about the industry all up, but also, more importantly, in the companies, and then all the rules behind the company members. So, all the staff members, executive directors, artistic directors, choreographers, because I think we're missing a very crucial artistic voice in Black Americans and Black dancers internationally. Being represented in the art form. And it is a miss to me. We are missing something in terms of where the art form could be. So.
Yeah, I think that the conversation around diversity usually centers around what happens on stage. However, we are really looking at what representation and being at certain tables and in certain rooms off stage, which can be even more important in ways than what we see on stage, because choices get made in those rooms. And if we're not there, then we can't affect them. Kiyon, do you want to jump in and give us a little bit of your experience?
Sure. I grew up in inner city Baltimore. I started dancing when I was about 10 years old, and I started as a tap dancer. I found ballet when I was about 12 years old. And I think what was uncommon for me at the time, as I reflect on that, is that when I first started dancing ballet, I was dancing at a school that was predominantly Black because it was Black owned. And I didn't realize there was anything different about that until I got into the Baltimore School for the Arts, which was painted in a completely different way, where, I was the only Black, boy in my class at the time. And there were some other Black men at that place. But then when I left Baltimore and I went to the Pittsburgh Ballet Theater School and trained there for 1 year, I was the only one. And from that moment forward in my career, dancing at the School of American Ballet after that for 2 years, coming to the Pacific Northwest Ballet School as a professional division student, of being the only one. And so my experience has been, that early assimilation into sort of this white world, and it really, I think, affected my perspective. And I think that quite honestly, my voice wasn't loud enough when I was going through sort of the things I was going through, my training, my early training and my pre-professional training into my career. And so I joined the Pacific Northwest Ballet in 2001, again, the only one. And so it has been hard. And what I will say is back then, these types of conversations were not happening. And I can say that right now, I am glad that these things are happening. I think that this moment of uprising is needed. And I'm glad for dancers like Amanda to have this opportunity to speak out and to really change the landscape for the artists who come behind us.
And with that, Amanda, please share with us.
Yeah, so I was born in Tacoma, Washington, grew up there, and I danced at a small studio from the time I was like 3 to 14 years old. And it's interesting because I was in that school and I was one of the only Black girls in the school. I think there was an older Black girl in the school who actually, her brother was just murdered in Tacoma by police. So all of this is like very much like personal to me. But yeah, I didn't realize that it was going to be like that everywhere. And it wasn't until I really went to the School of American Ballet as a summer course student that I was like, oh, okay. So I really am like one of the only people here of color. And so then after that, I auditioned for PNB school when I was 14 years old, and then joined the school. And yeah, basically the same thing, like either the only Black girl in the class, or sometimes there was another Latina girl, or there, Asian students as well. But I really was the only Black student usually in my class until kind of that moment of the professional division, because we had people coming from these different cities, and that's a way to kind of, get more diversity, because Seattle isn't always the most diverse city. So I had a couple other Black students in my professional division class. And then being in the professional division, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to get in the company, because I have never seen a Black woman in this company, at least in the time that I've been here. I know that there'd been one before, but it was hard to not see anyone that really looked like me, especially as a ballerina, like as a woman. But that pushed me, because I was kind of like, I want to make sure that these students below me have someone to like that they can see and say, hey, I can really do this. I can get in this company. So that really pushed me to just like not use my skin color or my height or any of that as a detriment to getting in the company. It really just pushed me more to be like, okay, I'm going to like just do the best I can to try and get in. And luckily I was able to get in, and I'm really grateful for this time that I'm able to speak about this. I think I was starting to, like, as an older student, and I would kind of get in trouble at times because people feel uncomfortable, you know? I think it's an uncomfortable conversation for a lot of people. So I would start to be talking about it, and then people would kind of like, ah. So then I was like, okay, the time will come when it's meant to happen. And luckily it's happened now. And I'm also just so grateful for Kiyon and Sara and these people that have been in the organization before me. Because I mean, Sara was my donor. I was a scholarship student at PNB, and she was my first donor, you know? So having like a Black woman, like kind of mentoring me in that way and like telling me like how she had it in the school, it was great. And then when I started choreographing, you know, I had Kiyon there as the next step coordinator. So he was kind of guiding me and saying like, you know, just really supportive in my choreographic endeavors as well. So I'm just very grateful to already having people like that. And then now we're all being able to talk together. So yeah.
I really want to talk about the isolation that one feels as a person of color, specifically Black, in the ballet world. And especially, I mean, and Kiyon, you said that it's very interesting. I started at Philadelphia dance school, Joan Myers Brown School, right? So my first experiences of dance were very, very brown. And then I went to Pennsylvania Ballet and had already learned how to code switch. But when you are in that, I call it that world of whiteness, can we talk a little bit about the pressures and the isolation? Because you are bound to do your arabesque, but represent your whole race at the same time. And I don't think that white people understand just how much that is a part of your experience beyond, you know, your white counterparts. Anyone?
It's
Kiyon.
it's pressure for sure. You know, getting into Pacific Northwest Ballet and being the only one, I knew for sure that the eyes of my entire community were on me. You know, I was setting the stage for what would come after me, which means I didn't have the luxury of, you know, giving up or not working as hard as anyone else, or being upset that I didn't get casted at something and storming into the director's office and saying, change it. Because there's a sense of, you know, you feel like one part of you feels like, well, this isn't fair, but the other part feels like, at least when I was growing up, that you almost feel grateful to be in the room a little bit, you know? So then you have that internal struggle to kind of deal with as well. It is a tremendous amount of pressure being the only person in the room when you don't see anyone else like you, when you don't have representation in the organization. And the fact is, no one ever asks you about how that makes you feel. You know, everyone just assumes that because you're in the room, that's enough, but it's not enough.
Right. That's that inclusion part about like what else is required. Sara, did you want to say something?
Absolutely. You know, and I think there's kind of two things that happen. One, you know, I in some ways was really almost just internalized everything. You know, which is one reason I just ended up quitting ballet, because it was not a mentally healthy thing for me at that time, because every piece of criticism was hard for me to unpack as to whether it was my shortcoming or had something to do with something I couldn't control. And so because, you know, ballet is built on this methodology of teaching and handing down, and there's this kind of teaching through negative reinforcement. And I know a lot of that's changing, but, you know, 20 years ago, that was the teaching style. And so, you know, it was it was hard to unpack, you know, is this criticism coming to me because you know, they think I can improve, or is this criticism coming to me because it's something that's completely out of my control, like my body and my skin color. And so for me, it ended up not being a healthy space for me. And that's one of the reasons I left the art form. You know, and in hindsight, you know, part of me was like, well, maybe I should have gone to Ailey, or I should have done this, but those are, you know, such limited choices to begin with. Like, you know, you can get some of the 5 parts on Broadway that they cast Black people in, or you can go to Ailey, or maybe you can go to Dance Theater of Harlem. And, you know, that's such a limited, you've trained for 15 years of your life and you get to choose from 3 roles. You know, and so, you know, that isolation, both in terms of, you know, what it feels like to internalize that criticism when you're an adolescent and you don't have anybody to explain to you, do not internalize that because it's not really about you. I mean, that's like the psychological impact of it. I was fortunate in that, you know, for part of my time at PNB, Cabby Mitchell was there, you know, and love him, you know, PNB's first Black soloist, you know, just was there for me in ways that I didn't realize it at the time, because I couldn't create perspective for myself. And so, you know, really just appreciated his guidance in terms of, you know, helping me navigate and supporting me in ways I didn't completely understand at the time because of my adolescent brain. But, you know, just in hindsight, so appreciating that, you know, and so that's really important. And like Amanda says, you know, Kiyon's here, I'm here, like, you know, that's, you know, twice as much support as I got. So,
right.
You know, it's a start. And this goes back to the, you know, you need people in roles that can also be advocates, because it is insane that we expect 14-year-olds to not only navigate the difficulty of professional training in and of itself, but then also navigate race relations for the, you know, entire industry. That's insane. No. You know, we need people in different roles, whether it's on board members like myself or, you know, operation leaders like Kiyon, to be able to, you know, kind of help the industry evolve and not place that on the dancers. You know, they have enough to worry about in terms of craft, you know, their craft and their art. So, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
So yeah, that's very true. And I want to touch on a little bit of that, because I think that, you know, one of the difficult decisions that I had to make just recently was moving out of the school and being a representation in the front of the room for so many young Black dancers and moving into management. And the reason that I felt that move was so important is like Sara points out, is that I felt like I needed to be in a position where I had even more influence, was in a position where I could create more change through advising the people who had the power to actually inform the change. So, you know, it is so important for us to not just be in the studio, but as Sara points out, to be all over the organization so that we really can see actual change happen.
But that's such an interesting sort of conundrum, because you don't want to leave the front of the studio, because you know how important, you know, your presence is for little Black boys or Black girls, right? Or just children of color who just see something different. But then you're also torn because you're like, I need to be over here. So the idea that we're always in this like high pressure situation where we just can't just occupy the space as us and just do us for us. It's always, you know, the responsibility of Blackness in these, to hold space in these, you know, in these ways. Amanda, can you talk a little bit about the mentoring that you're doing? Because I think it's really, really important, because that's the other piece that Sara sort of mentioned. Please.
Yeah, based off of what Sara was saying about like being in the school and not really having anyone, and then also being an adolescent, I felt that immensely being in the school when I was one of the only Black girls, you know, in the class. And then when you feel like something is happening, you can't really like talk to anyone about it, or you kind of think that maybe I'm just going crazy, like that this is happening because of this, and things are out of our control at times because of what ballet is structured on. Mm-hmm. Sorry, what was the question again?
The mentoring program.
Mentorship. Okay, yes. So because of that, once I knew getting into the company, like that pressure was immediately going to be put on me, and I wanted to change things, and I was like, oh, like I don't know how. Like I was trying to like maybe like get people's input. I talked with Kiyon before and just kind of like seeing what people thought. But then I realized at a certain point, I was like, I'm going to have to just make this happen myself. I'm going to have to just say like, hey, this is what I want to do. Like, I'm going to get another dancer to help me with it, and we're going to just make it happen. So during this pandemic, right, when it was like in the beginning stages of it, Cece Eliasu in the company, and I just talked, and we were like, okay, like let's just start it now. Like this is the time to really talk to these students and get to know them. So we started with a level 8 class and PD class, and then we kind of just worked our way down to level 6. So we did level 6, level 7, level 8 women, and then advanced intermediate or advanced men, PD men, and then the PD women. So we are talking to so many students, and I don't think that as students we don't always have that connection with the company, and I thought it was important to just like have us be able to listen to their voices because they're so important. I think that students, even though we teach them so many things, they can teach us so many things too, and they're so aware of what's going on in the world. And actually, like in this past mentorship, I guess a couple of weeks ago, we finished it for the year or for the semester, I guess. And they were talking about what was going on in the world and kind of about diversity and like what they want to see change in the dance world. And, most of these kids are not diverse. They're, just white kids, but they're, able to talk about it and not feel uncomfortable. And that's really giving me hope too, because it's like, we need to start talking about these things when kids are young. So that way, then it's just kind of there with them and they know that it's okay to talk about.
And we can normalize it, right?
Yes, yes.
So let's when we got together to talk about what we were going to talk about, one of the things that came up was the linchpin in this, right? Which is the aesthetics of ballet, and is there a quote unquote space for Blackness, whatever that is, right? Because we are all things and everything, but of Blackness within the aesthetic of what we see or what we know to be ballet right now, what we believe is ballet right now. I mean, because we 4 different people, 4 Black people who look different, right? And I'm sure our physicalities are different as well, but yet we've been in this space. So if you want to crack open, let's start with it. What is ballet? Is it the movement, or is it the pink tights and the pink shoes and the slick bun? Is it the line? Is it uniformity? Because for me, I come out of the dance theater of Harlem tradition where the uniformity wasn't in our bodies, not even skin tone, but just our physical bodies. We had women who were like 5'2" and women who were 6 feet tall on stage, brown, light skin with booties, thin, like we had everything on the stage. And so our uniformity was in our dynamics, in our technique and dynamics. So does somebody want to start to kind of kick off your thoughts about where we are in the aesthetics of ballet in 2020? Go ahead, Amanda.
I think, I think it's because, especially when you have a corps de ballet, there's that sense of having everyone kind of be the same, because the corps isn't supposed to draw attention. They're not supposed to do that. So I think that's another reason why it's been so hard for people that don't fit in that mold to even get hired, in these companies, because that's the entry level is the corps, is the apprentice and then the corps. And then it's also based off of these ballets that have been created. So many, quote unquote white ballets, Giselle, Swan Lake, like all of these ballets where everyone, they like this uniformity there. So I really think that it plays a big role into why we have these aesthetics, quote unquote, and why it's so hard for Black dancers to kind of fit in that mold, because we're not opening our lines. Right? I don't think we need it.
if you don't make a line, you can't. If you don't make a line, you can't break a line. So that's all I'm saying. But Sara, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I think that idea of, uniformity, down to the position of your bun and the color of your lipstick. I mean, that is an aesthetic choice that was made, 10 years ago by many, many different people. But, when I see emerging choreographers today, that's not the choice they're making. So when we're talking about artistic repertory, like, that's a choice to include, pieces that really drive that a homogenous uniformity and think that that's required for the art form. No, that's a very traditionalist take on the art form. But when I think of, works, even works by like Crystal Pite, her piece is not going to be, there's no detrimentalness to her piece to have more diversity in it. So that's definitely, I think, an outmoded kind aesthetic, and it doesn't have to be the future of ballet at all. So,
Kiyon, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there has been such an evolution over time in how white bodies look in ballet. And I think that taking this next step forward to not say, well, it's a white body, it's a black body, it's just a body, and it can be beautiful, it can be athletic, it can be strong. I mean, the types of work that choreographers are doing now require strong dancers and no longer require these, sylph-like, bodies to be on stage. And that is, I don't think that is any longer the requirement to be a ballet dancer. And I think that if we had more representation in our art form, different people creating the works and telling different stories and having different perspectives when they look at a certain company that may be only made up of, more white dancers than dancers of color, that they're seeing everybody for who they are, and they're not just seeing what they want to see because of some, implicit bias that they may or may not know they have,
But I think Sara, you were saying these are choices, right? And so I mean, people can just choose again, right? Like we don't have to stay with that. Like the Balanchine aesthetic completely transformed. Like and even his dancers were short and thick and tight when he first started, and then you get to the 60s and 70s and they start to be more long and lithe. So that's what I wonder. I have to ask when I say ballet leadership, what are you clinging to, and what is that representing to you? I mean, when I write about it, I write about it looking like a commitment to whiteness, that aesthetic, right? Or that European aesthetic is what will become perhaps a throwback in a way,
Right.
because we are browning. I mean, the planet in and of itself is browning. So we're here, we're capable. And so what's required to make the space?
A fundamental shift in the perspective of the people making the choices, and then their ability to be able to teach and transform the people who are watching it what the definition of beauty or beauty in the ballet world is. That's what it requires, because it takes the energy of lots of people to make change, and it can't just be one company or one director doing it. It has to be all of us collectively making a new choice to say we're moving in this direction and this is beautiful, and our audiences and our patrons and everyone who is with us, they will learn, and then we will see a shift in our world, but not until then.
Do you think that look, the stakeholders, that's real, the money behind it, that's real, right? Sara, you're in the boardroom, right? So can we talk a little bit about, I'm in conversations with ballet leadership around the world, and everybody is telling me that they're ready, they're wanting it, and somehow we're not seeing it happen as quickly, or there are these little things of like, oh, we can't let go of this ballet because we have to do that. Sara, what's your experience in terms of being a woman of color in that position where these conversations kind of like sometimes stop and start?
Yeah. And, sometimes everything comes back to money. So, I think one of the difficulties of running arts organizations is that every year you have a balanced budget. There is no cushion, right? And so we're seeing that happen. We're seeing the ramifications of that in real time with COVID-19. And so when you think about how you put your your reps together for the year, it comes down to what will make money. And it starts with your story ballets. They are the ones that carry your revenue, right? And the story ballets are predominantly going back to that outmoded aesthetic, are what is the traditionalist like type of ballet. But they tend to be the things that draw people in the door, not necessarily because of that they're physical aesthetics, but because their names like Romeo and Juliet, Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, that's what people know. That's what brings them in the door. The problem is all of these cost at least $1 million to create. And so when you're talking about let's, redo our repertory so we can actually make it friendly to diverse skin colors and diverse body types, you have this financially entrenched body of work to pull from, and you don't have the resiliency as an organization and the financial troves as an organization to throw all that away and start afresh. And so I think that's one of the systemic kind of structural challenges of how quickly as ballet we can move forward. But where I see more hope is our approach to mixed repertoires, where I see, we did Her Story last year, where we featured all female choreographers. We did American Voices, American Stories, where we, featured different voices and stories for minority communities. That is where that leading edge is going to be, right? And I would love to see things where we draw audiences in and we, commission short dance works by Black choreographers, and we put that out into the digital world, and we say, what do you want to see funded? And then we create more ballets and we start having that conversation and engage audiences, because I think there's a lot of fear, financial fear, that if we move away from that traditional ballets, that we simply won't be able to exist as an organization. And so that's the real kind of the hard part about making this change, is how do we do that when most organizations can barely balance their budget every year, can barely pay their bills. And so that's where I start to think of how do we get innovative in terms of bringing more voices into the picture, getting them, whether it's representing them digitally and getting them on the main stage. And how do we start doing that? Because there are people out there making great work, and it's just that fear. And the other thing I would say is that financial fear is really real. The decision making that drives it's really real. But you have to think about the people that are making decisions today came out of that traditional mindset. That is how they got where they are and where they advanced. It's true of corporate America as well. So you're asking them to rethink when they've come out of that world. And so, some of it, unfortunately, is on us to show them a different way. There is a different way to do this, and let's do it in a way. And I'm all about how can we bring data to bear? How can we start using digital channels to show that our audiences actually want more than just what we think they want, what we give them, and start pushing that envelope and getting that, new choreographers in the mix, all of that. Because it's that same, I think about, I even think about the new works we do, and for me, it's incremental innovation. It's okay, I've seen this, some of this stuff. I'm I feel like I've seen this before many, many times, but it's just a different white male choreographer doing more or less the same thing. We got to get back beyond that. We got to get beyond that.
I think it's also a value system. Right? It's the reason why we have. Do you hear feedback? I hear feedback on mine.
A little bit, but
okay. I hope it goes away. I think it's good. The reason why we value Swan Lake is because Swan Lake gets done over and over again. So somebody that tells us, it's a signifier that this is what is important and this is what is valuable. And so there are story ballets are just, basically they're love stories, gone awry. You know what I mean? Like, it's really just human love stories. And so I'm wondering if ballet can afford to be courageous enough to begin to like reimagine these. I mean, Akram Khan's Giselle was a
Mhm.
huge hit, right? So it's not like we have to necessarily throw out the baby with the bathwater, but maybe it's like dusting the baby off and dressing the baby up a different way.
I
Amanda,
mean, you see,
go
sorry.
ahead, go ahead,
I was
go
going to
ahead.
say you see it all the time in the opera. I mean, they have this large canon of work that's quite archaic, but each director dresses it up and changes it and brings it to a different place to make it current, to make it more relevant to the audiences who go see it today. And unfortunately, with traditional ballets, like, well, and I will say in American ballet companies, they have not really changed. I mean, we do a different RAJ by Jean-Christophe Maillot, which is different.
Mhm.
But when we're looking at your sort of the Sleeping Beauties, and and the Merry Widows and things like that, those are all still how they were originally created. And so you're right, a reimagining is so important.
And I think
Yeah.
education too of your audience, like these are all conversations. Like now we're all talking, right?
Mhm.
So maybe that's something that ballet leadership and organizations can look towards.
I wanted
Is
to say, though, one thing about the new works that Sarah was bringing up as well, because she's absolutely right. Even though lots of companies are doing these new works and these mixed reps, they are drawing from the same 5 or 6 choreographers. Each company is doing the same works around the nation. I mean, if you look at the beginning of the season, you will see that most companies have very, very, very similar reps. And
Mhm.
it takes someone to step out and say, well, we're not going to do, work by so and so because 3 other companies are doing that. Let's make space for someone new. And that's what we need. We need to create space for new voices and new perspectives in the ballet world.
Well, and I know I know the logic that goes on behind those choices, and a lot of it is like, well, they have name recognition, and that to Teresa's
Mhm.
point, the only reason they have name recognition is because we do their work over and
Everybody's
over, and
hiring them.
we can pick a black person's work to do over and over again, and then they would have name recognition, and same with women over and over again, and then they have name recognition, and so it's just that willingness to, and we have so many tools today. Like I just can't wait until, we're really leveraging, digital and social as much as we can as an industry. And we're starting to get there. I think one of the silver linings of COVID is that it's forcing us to get there. And I
Absolutely.
think that will create a venue for us where we can put new work out there, see audience response, and it's less about name recognition, even involve audiences in choosing what pieces we put forward. And to me, I think that'll be a huge opportunity to just, kind of rethink how we do things instead of going back to what's gonna, what is someone willing to sponsor, what's going to make money, and what's going to draw, has name recognition, and that's going to draw folks. So
Amanda, I want to ask you a question because as a budding choreographer, one
Mhm.
of the traps is that oftentimes, especially women and choreographers of color, can't afford to fail. When we all know that the idea of developing your artist, developing your voice, right, is being able to create work, right?
Yeah.
So can you talk to me a little bit about how you're finding you're stretching into choreography, and do you have that fear of failure and never being able to get another shot?
Yeah. I mean, to be honest with the fear of failure thing, I always felt interested about that because it's like what defines what failure is in art, because it's so subjective, like what defines what failure is. Like if we're trying to just continuously do a heteronormative love story and you don't do it in the right way, or you do something that's more centering to men, in love, like is that considered failing? So for me, I'm just personally, I've been just trying to work with so many different types of people, and not just straight people, but queer people, and getting all of these different perspectives, all of these different perspectives of different minority groups as well, because I personally I'm not afraid to fail. because I think it's more important to try and get to get different narratives out there, if that makes sense. Even if it does reach, one or two people compared to, affecting that majority of people that are like, oh, I don't really relate with this or whatever. It's like reaching those one or two people that might, I think, is kind of more so important to me in this moment.
Right. No, that I'm right on. But the thing is, like, for instance, when it was announced that Kyle Abraham was, commissioned to do a piece on City Ballet, wanted to interview him, and we talked about, like, it's been 11 years since a Black choreographer had the opportunity to choreograph for that company, and the pressure he felt about, like, what he would create, because it needed to be successful to white people in a different way that like white choreographers get to fail and get another shot.
They definitely do.
If Kyle had failed, then not only would he maybe not have gotten another shot, but that would mean that it might be 11 years until another Black choreographer, right? So that's the pressure that I think.
Yeah, and I think it's ridiculous. I think that's ridiculous when you look at even Balanchine's ballets, who's created, hundreds ballets. A lot of his earlier works, I mean, even the works that he came out with, Agon, these pieces, no one liked them. He failed technically during that time. And it wasn't until, and he could, but I'm just saying, if you allow that to happen, failure has to happen in order for growth to happen, in order for a choreographer or any artist to really find, their voice. So if we don't allow that and we don't let that progress for each individual, then, like, how do we know who's actually, we might be missing out on a whole bunch of talent.
We definitely are. But the reality of the pressure that that white directors, the reality that as a Black person coming in to even choreograph on the main stage, right?
Yeah.
Is so rare and slim, and everything hinges, right, on one or two people, almost like us in those studios being isolated in our own training, representing our whole race, right, in our own space.
I mean, and it's another example of an inequity, because as a Black choreographer, when you get that one shot, that first chance, in some ways it impedes your creativity, because you know that you want to create something that you want to create for yourself, but at the same time, I have to create something that's going to allow me to get another opportunity, and that's also not going to create a problem for other Black choreographers to have chances, and so you're stuck in a tough place, when you are, like Kyle was the first one in 11 years, I
think it's really something to articulate, because I don't know if white people truly understand that twice as good to get half as much, and the pressure that is on Blackness in these spaces. Like, this ballet is not anomalous in this way, right? But I think it's really important to articulate, because we've seen white choreographers have the opportunity to fail and fail again and grow and even fail again, but they keep getting commissions. They keep getting opportunities.
Yeah, and I think another point, I mean, that I felt as a choreographer, and I should think like many minority artists that are choreographers have felt this too, is like, you make one really good piece, you haven't failed, but then that's the standard that you're held to. You don't have the ability to fail in that sense too. So how do we get out of that too? Because it's like, for other people, it's like they do something great, and like then they fail, and they're like, oh, well, like, it's fine. This is just like an off piece for them or whatever like that. But like another choreographer, let's say like one of the first pieces I made was like fairly better, or like, I don't know, people liked watching it. And so then I feel like I have to stay at that point or go better or get better. It can't go lower, or else they're going to be like, well, we don't really want to see her work anymore. Right. We don't want to give her that, opportunity anymore. And so I feel right now I feel pressure, because I'm going to be choreographing something digitally for PNB in November. And so it's not on the main stage yet, but I'm hoping I can eventually do something on the main stage. But I'm like, if I don't do anything that isn't deemed, good digitally in a 5-minute
Then what?
piece, does that mean I'm not going to be able to choreograph on the stage when I've done stuff on the stage for students and people have liked it already? You know, and I think it also comes to, you know, audiences putting pressure on the company. Like audiences putting pressure on those directors, on those people making the decisions to say, hey, I really like this person's work. Like, I want to see it again, because that is like what's going to really drive directors or whoever's making those decisions to continue letting certain people make stuff.
So here we are. We are having this conversation. What do we need or want from this moment? There's work that's happening on different levels, and there've been, because I don't want people to think that nothing is happening. You know, I know that PNB has done really good work and has done the actual internal, like, human work that will help shift and move the organization further along, you know, as the opportunities come, right? But what do we, if we want to think in a field capacity, and then maybe even in an organizational capacity, what do we want to see happening? Like, and it could be low hanging fruit, really easy things, or it can be, you know, the bigger things. Like, we want to see an African American artistic directors. We want to see more of them. Anybody?
I think like, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Amanda. I'm sorry.
One thing that's like, I just realized after talking to so many different Black dancers from all over, is making these connections with all the people in our community involved in dance. So like, me connecting with all of these different Black dancers and companies, it's a way to see, okay, this is what's happening here in this part of the field, and this is what's happening here. And then we can kind of give and take from each other to kind of benefit our own companies. And then also having people throughout that network to consistently hold these directors and these people accountable. It's like very much like, we need to hold these people accountable and speak out continuously.
And what does accountability look like? Go ahead, Sarah.
You know, for me, it's really about measurable commitments. I've been reading up a lot on implicit bias lately, and 70 to 75% of Americans have implicit bias when it comes to white, seeing black and white race, right? And then how that implicit bias leads into disparities when there are opportunities for discretionary decisions. And so when we're talking about industry change, institutional change, organizational change, there has to be measurable commitments. And what a lot of academics talk about is, if you don't measure it, how do you know if you're effectively limiting implicit bias? Because we know most people have it, and we know it impacts decision making. And if you don't measure it, how do you know you're actually changing it? And so for me, it really is about making measurable commitments, right? And they're not going to be perfect in the beginning, but it is the way to make a difference. And so that's measurable commitments in things like what schools do you audition at? Like, for example, PNB added audition locations in Atlanta with the Tacoma Urban Performing Arts Center, which specifically would have lots of brown and Black dancers in the audition. And that's just one small measurable thing you can do. What does the diversity of your school look like? Measure that. What does the diversity of your staff look like? Measure that. How about the choreographers? What's the diversity of your choreographer base? Measure that. Make commitments to mentor Black choreographers. And mentorship looks like you get the opportunity to fail. You can make one piece that's great, you make another that's bad, but we believe in you, so you get to make more. That's called organizational mentorship. And so I would love to see, at organizational levels, them making commitments to say, we are going to, have artists in residence for Black choreographers. We are going to commit to commissioning a series of works from, ex-Black choreographers. We are going to commit to reinventing our base of story ballets to be more inclusive. We are, those are all commitments you can make, and they're measurable and they're specific. And that's how change is made, because Until then, if we just have niceties talking about wanting to include people, but don't actually make measurable commitments that we can hold ourselves accountable on, things aren't going to change. And if they do change, it's going to be really slowly. So for me, I'm looking for those measurable commitments. Yeah.
Kiyon?
I'm looking for more representation. Sorry, a little feedback here. I'm looking for more representation in artistic leadership and choreographers. These are the places that I feel like could affect the most change in our world. The people who are making the decisions about which dancers are we bringing in, which pieces are we bringing in, what does that look like? You know, how do I view the dance world and how do I view dancers in general? You know, what was my upbringing? And I mean, until we can have people who are sitting in those seats of power, who were brought up in a different way and not brought up in a way that's steeped in this, you know, traditional white way, then I think that we are not going to see change happen as quickly as we would like it to. And then also to just reaffirm what Sara says, data also does drive change. And so we will need to see that as well.
I mean, I've been struggling with this accountability piece because there's two parts of it, I think. I think there's the individual accountability aspect, right? And I think that happens with, you know, if the board of directors is a part of that, if the community is a part of that, funders need to be a part of that. And that's another aspect, is that funders aren't necessarily holding companies accountable to the outcomes, right? Like, is what you're building sustainable? And does it have the connective tissue to the community in a really substantive way? So on the say, like the local level, and then in terms of the field, I find that there's this really hands off sort of. I'm not going to say anything about how somebody else runs their company or their school, that I think will fundamentally hold back change, because if it's not peer reviewed, right? And if we're not holding a standard, because it's intersectionality in terms of training students and students going from here to there, and so they're having very specific experiences in all these different pipelines. And if the pipelines aren't actually talking to one another and agreeing on certain things, then the field at large doesn't shift. Like, the mentality of it doesn't shift. So I think that there's a real sort of, yes, we need to hold people accountable, but they also need to hold themselves accountable. Like, there's a point when you're just going to have to be like, you know, is that right or wrong for you?
Yeah, and I think there is that kind of peer element that needs to have an accountability element too. But when I think about this, I think about the fact that we've been studying our audience diversity for probably 5 or 6 years at PNB now, and really trying to make an effort to draw in younger audiences, because it's all about the sustainability of the institution in the art form. And what I'm finding, and what we are finding with the audiences, is that they are actually more diverse. The younger audiences are more diverse, and what they will be expecting is representation on stage and diversity of voices. And so when I think about the longevity of the art form and the sustainability of the art form, we need to be reflecting the communities we're in, the audiences that are coming to us, that are becoming more diverse. And I believe that those institutions that really hold on to this traditionalist mantle, which is predominantly white, are going to look very aged after time. And they are going to suffer at the end of the day. You know, it may not be tomorrow, but it may be in 10 years when they're figuring out, why have they lost audience? Why are they losing revenue? Why are they struggling to survive? It's because they haven't been current. And when audiences have so much competition for their eyeballs and time now, we compete against everything. We compete against e-games now and Twitch and everything for people's time. You know, why should they show up to ballet if we're stuck in the 1970s. So, you know, for me, it's all about how do we move the art form forward? How do we bring the art form into the 21st century, and not be deaf to, you know, the realities of the world. And it's not only about Black, but it's also, we're very deaf on gender issues too. So we got to deal with both of those things.
Well, that's why,
gonna, you know, go forward, you know.
that's why for me personally, when I started this work, it was in the diversity sphere. And then I quickly realized that, oh, it's the culture of ballet, right? It's the suppression of personal development in young dancers, right? The idea that we don't teach, it's not critical thinking, right? And the intellect is not lifted up or encouraged, because dancers need to just be able to take directions and keep their mouths shut. Like there's a whole cultural shift that I think we're on the cusp of, especially with all these dancers now speaking up and learning how, I call it activating their activism, and being able to advocate for themselves in their own spaces, but also in the field. And that may end up being a whole other layer of accountability. That's not, I don't think, going away, because I don't think we can unring this bell, quite frankly. So yeah. So are there any other thoughts that are like top of mind? Kiyon,
I mean,
were you gonna? Yeah.
I was just going to agree with you. I think you are right. I think this new generation uses their voices in a different way than my generation did when we were growing up in the ballet world. We were very much, you know, do what you're told and don't say anything and don't speak back. And this new generation of dancers, they talk back. They tell you what they're feeling. They tell you when you say something to them that they don't really like. And I mean, I think that it is important for dancers to have a voice. You know, they always talk about use your artistic voice and all this stuff. Well, how can you use it if you suppress it all the time? And so I am really happy to see, you know, Amanda's generation of professional dancers who are really standing up for themselves and standing up for their colleagues as well, because it was certainly missing when I was growing up.
I will also say that I think that there needs to be a different set of criteria for artistic directors. Because before it was just like you had a great career, you were a star, or you danced with a certain company, and that's. But I think that we're going to need to, you need to have some leadership training. You need to have some, do that DEI training and undoing racism training. Like you need to have other skills, right? Leadership is. I always say that my new thing is that artistic directors are just dancers with offices, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that you're a leader or you know how to manage people. In a way. And I think that that's a step forward that ballet can really take, that might shift where it's going and what it looks like in the future.
Right. And I mean, and that's part of that history piece as well. I'm sorry, Sarah, but that's part of that history piece right there. You know, it's like, that is how it was always done. And so that's how it continues to be done. And until someone breaks that cycle and says, well, wait a minute, let's really, maybe as a board say, well, is it really important that this person was a ballet star, that they be in the big chair as artistic director? Is that the most important thing? Or should we be looking for someone who, yes, has a dance background, but also has other things available to offer our organization? And that has not, I'm not saying that the artistic directors are not qualified for their jobs, but I'm just saying there needs to be, like you said, a different set of criteria. Expansion.
And also just, looking at dancers as, this, not bodies that are interchangeable. I feel like there's this attitude that, dancers are, bodies that are interchangeable without mental health, they're not whole beings. And man, that has to stop, because, a company that I will not name at the moment, imploded recently, about a year and a half ago, that we all watched. And the board, in my opinion, did not step up in the way they should have at that moment in time. Because it is about, there's so much of it, and I'm going to open a can of worms, which we won't have time to address, is about power dynamics. Mm-hmm. And it, like I said, there's a lot of intersectionality to it, not only Black, but gender. And we really need to talk about what is the image and who have we idolized as artistic directors in the past, and really come to terms with that, you know, while they might have been able to create great work on stage, the baggage that they've created for the organization and for the dancers themselves is really problematic. And that we need to, like Kiyon said, reinvent, you know, and like you said, Theresa, reinvent what we expect of a leader for an organization. And it's not just about artistic vision and then you can get away with whatever you want. That is simply, to me, unacceptable. That it really is about how do we bring out the best in our artists, which means treating them like whole beings and like individuals. So,
and I think we need to be at these tables in these rooms, because where this is white people's work to undo this, we need to be there because they cannot do it on their own, right? Not to bear the emotional labor necessarily, but we have to keep things on track. Quite frankly.
Yeah.
and, you
Personally,
know, sorry, Amanda, go ahead.
right. It's just personally, I remember when that first IABD audition / series took place and all of those artistic directors kind of got together. I think that really needs to happen now, because all of them are asking questions and stuff. They all need to get together. We need to have people there of color to hold them accountable and say, hey, this is like what needs to happen. These are the action items. This is what you need to be held accountable for.
Yeah, it is happening.
Okay.
The Equity Project was a part of that. It was 21 companies that came together. PNB was a part of it. And we did training. We did, you know, core values, mission statements. That work is happening. Now, the question is what happens next, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's happened in Europe with Positioning Ballet. Ted Branson at Dutch National Ballet convened 40 international companies together to talk about this. So it's not that the conversations aren't happening and that they're not coming together. It's, I think, the directionality of it and the intent, and the commitment to stay in it, and really to be able to check and call one another out. That's where the greatest weakness is, because if you are not going to be courageous enough to say, hey, okay, let's put it in this really, we look at George Floyd, right? There were 4 officers present. There were 4 of them who all went through the same training. And somehow, some lack of humanity or checks and balances in at least 3 of them was horribly off. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Either and so you hold the blue line, like whatever that is. What is your allegiance to? So there's that sort of thing that we have to break down, you know, and that's, I think it takes courage, really, but it also that's personal work. Right? It's just not enough to undo it in your own company, because then we get one company that's doing great things and then all these other dancers have to dance in these companies that are kind of jacked up. So that's my question is, are we really ready to step into being called out by your peers? Because you will get dragged now. Now we see that you will get dragged because dancers, you know, you see what I'm saying?
I think this is where funders and foundations have a really important role to play.
Absolutely.
You know, that to call out where we don't see companies doing the work they should be doing. I feel very fortunate to be at PNB because we're on the journey, and I think people are very earnest about going on the journey, even if there are moments of missteps. Like I know that Peter and Ellen and a lot of the other staff members are very, very committed to it, and the board as well. But we have work to do. We know that, but we're on the journey. But I don't know if that's true at other organizations, honestly. So
Yeah.
I think the funding community, I think the foundation community can play a role in this. This needs to be, the racial equality needs to be something that foundations take up as part of their mantle. In terms of what they want, the change that they want to see because they do give out large amounts of money. I would love to see more of them make this a critical issue and have it be something that's part of your application. Tell us about your diversity and inclusion. What are you doing to make a difference? Because money is power. So
Truly. Anything else? This is so wonderful. I mean, I think that personally for the work that I will say this, because I do want to say that when I started this work, Ellen Walker, I did a breakout panel at the Dance USA conference. And Ellen, one of my stipulations was like, I'll talk about this if you can get people who are the people who have the power that can make change in the room. And Amy Fitterer from Dance USA said, usually the artistic directors don't come, but the executive directors come. And Ellen was in that room. And Ellen waited to talk to me afterwards. And Ellen called me after that. And Ellen was like, and I asked her hard questions, like just reflective questions. And she kept coming back. And I have to say that your leaders are in this work authentically.
Yeah.
And are really and have deepened, have grown roots into this work and really believe in it. And they believe in all of you who are sitting here are part of the organization, but also what PNB is supposed to be and do for the community and for the dance community at large. And so, I just wanted to say that because I'm out here with these, and I know some of them are here, some of them are there, and it goes in and out. But the thing that I really appreciate about PNB and your leaders is that they have been consistent. And they have always had their foot on the gas going straight down this road, even when it's not easy,
And I agree with that. They have used their platform very well. And I can only speak for myself and my own experience at PNB, but I can tell from my own journey, there's always been space made for me within PNB. My trajectory has shown that they have created a space for me to grow and to be a leader in this organization. And I mean, and that is all I could really, ask for in an organization. And to see them doing this work and doing it so earnestly, it makes me see that they are a leader in this space. And I hope that we can be the ones to hold other companies accountable for the work that we're trying to do.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I was going to say, I'm so happy. I'm really grateful that of all the companies I could have been at, it is at PNB, because I'm lucky that I already had a good relationship with Ellen and with Peter, and I had open communication with them. So, I mean, it's great that I'm here of all places to be able to speak and for them to really listen to me. But I do hope with them being such great leaders that they can now hold other companies accountable that aren't doing that and saying, hey, look, this is working for us. This is what we're doing. This is what we really care about and what's important. And we hope that you can follow us on this.
Yeah. And it's not about perfection. It's about the effort.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And they have effort. They have put it in. And you guys, I think, are really sort of a product of that, because I know, Kiyon, they lift you up and they try to find the ways, and they're working. And Amanda, same thing. They're like, what do you want? What do you need? How do we need to be better? And I think that the thing that's different that I find really beautiful about them is a level of humility in the way that they come at this work, and a level of vulnerability in being, even when it's hard to listen, right? To ground themselves and go okay, we might have to hear some ugly things or painful things, but we're willing to do it. So yeah, I think PNB is in a great position. I've always seen them as leaders in the Equity Project personally. And I expect them to be, going forward.
Absolutely.
I would like to thank you all for this beautiful conversation. And you know
Thank
what?
you.
PNB listens.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.